Welcome to the Hello Seattle podcast, a local perspective on living in and moving to Seattle.
Yeah, we're excited to introduce you to people, places, and communities that make living in our hometown special.
Hello, Seattle. I'm Zach McDonald, your host and real estate agent with Real Property Associates.
And I'm your mortgage guy, Dan Keller. We got a great show today. We've got a guy sitting between us. So this is the first time we've had a guest.
First guest.
We got a former offensive lineman. What were you at the UW?
Yeah, right.
Former offensive lineman.
Go Dogs.
You got a big old 48-year-old dude that likes to lift weights on the right and a point guard on the left. So
yeah, if that's what you want to call me. I don't know.
Guard?
I was a short forward in high school.
Okay. I love it. We got a great episode today, Z.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have Bill on today because Bill is a local Edmonds guy and also a real estate and business attorney. And I mean, his firm handles pretty much everything. In fact, Bill, you helped me do my will. So
and me too.
And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those considerations for estate planning as you're moving from one state to another, specifically Washington State. But before we jump into that and talking with Bill a little bit, Dan, why don't you give us a quick update on the mortgage market?
Yep, like we do every week, just a real quick mortgage update in under a minute. Mortgage rates continue to improve. So I'm looking right here, week over week. We were mid sevens last week. Now we're mid to low sevens, which is good because 2 weeks ago we were over 8.
Yeah, it's been a nice.
That, Bill?
No, that's
it's been a nice drop over the past couple weeks.
Like the old days.
It's like the old days. Yeah. So providing some relief for our first-time home buyers out there, but that's good news. All is good in the mortgage industry right now.
Yeah, on the real estate side, I was sharing this earlier on one of my YouTube videos, but the amount of homes listed last year versus this year, same exact day, we had almost 500 new listings versus 220-ish. So we've had a massive drop off in the amount of listing activity. It's normal to have seasonal slowdown, but it's half of what we saw last year and even more than that.
Well,
Bill's looking at me like, whoa, that's crazy. There's just not a lot of real estate activity going on. There's not as many buyers, not as many sellers, but it's interesting to look year over year coming into the Thanksgiving week and have that big of a drop off.
Yeah, and I had a client today tell me that she was going to sell off market, and I threw a temper tantrum at her.
It's not a great idea right now.
Please don't do that.
In a really low inventory environment, that's where you have the most benefit from listing your property and exposing it to the market.
Yes.
Wow, I know you agree with that, Bill. So, Bill, you're an Edmonds guy. Dan, you're almost an Edmonds guy, Richmond Beach. I've been in and out of Edmonds for my whole entire life, just moved to Shoreline. But Bill, we want to ask you a little bit about Edmonds. So
sure.
Why do you live in Edmonds still?
Well, yeah, I live in Edmonds because my office is in Edmonds, and if you haven't been, it's not a place you commute to. It's a place you want to live if you're going to live there. And I'm kind of old school, work from the office guy, and I don't do very well working from home, and so I shorten my commute as much as possible.
There we go.
So
that's why you live in Edmonds. You live in Edmonds because it's close to work.
Yeah, that's right, and we love Edmonds. Yep.
Well, if you were to describe Edmonds to somebody who's new to the area or relocating to the area, how would you describe Edmonds?
Yeah, I lived in a little town called Seal Beach for a while in the early 2000s in Southern California. And so if you have Southern California folks moving up and they know Seal, I say Edmonds is and I got this from some folks who used to live in Edmonds and now do live in Seal, some old friends of ours. Right, and they say Edmonds is the Seal Beach of Seattle, and that's very true. And so if you know Southern California, Edmonds is the Seal Beach of Seattle.
Dan, you got a question?
Yeah, no, I mean, I grew up in Snohomish County, and so the way that growing up, and even as I came back as an adult after college, I always thought of Edmonds as that's where all the old people lived.
Deadman's is what it was called when I was a kid.
And
not
so
joking,
it's not what I thought. It was the truth, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until Jenny and I moved to Woodway, which is Edmonds Woodway, in 2016, I realized how cool the downtown Edmonds area, the community really is. I mean,
it didn't used to be that way.
No. Because I think I remember meeting Bill. I think we met at that little Pelican, right? What's it called?
Rusty Pelican.
Downtown in
olives back then.
Yeah, in 2013. I think it was like 2012, 2013 I first met you. And we had coffee down there, and I'll never forget driving down there going, I've really never been downtown Edmonds. This is kind of cool. And then obviously as we moved there, and I love to fish. I love the outdoors, and just being right down there, the ferry, the waterfront, it's pretty sneaking cool. And obviously look at what real estate's done there in the last 5 years. I think people are catching on. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it's no secret.
No secret anymore. We were just talking before the podcast. There's been some really cool businesses, like new restaurants coming in. It's really kind of made Edmonds more modern, and so great community, man. I absolutely love it too, and I highly recommend if you can get a piece of land in Edmonds, do it now.
Oh yeah, Bill, what would you say is special about Edmonds? What makes Edmonds a special place?
Well, it's close to Seattle, but it's very much small town feel. If you go to the downtown, like you and I were just talking about, there's a two-story height restriction down in the bowl, and that very much keeps everything as a small town feel. If you want to build out Edmonds, you can't. What you see is what you get in the downtown. It's got that retail downtown core that makes it very cohesive, and it's walkable, and it's you get that small town downtown feel with all small businesses, almost all small businesses.
Yeah. Well, and Edmonds has changed a lot. They've kept some of the character and the height restrictions. What have you seen over your time growing up in Edmonds, living in Edmonds here now with your family? What has changed about Edmonds?
Well, Dan alluded to it. I mean, it was very much a retirement community. It was always a great place, but very, very slow. There was a lot of shops that smelled of potpourri, and you could buy a lot of lovely women's clothing, and then you still can, but you can also go to bars and restaurants, and there's a pretty broad range of retail, and a couple really nice jewelry stores, Andy Klein.
There you go. There's a shout out.
Yeah, right. And so there's just a lot more in Edmonds. It's a destination now, much more than it used to be. And you can go there on purpose and not accidentally for fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, what if you had to pick something to do in Edmonds, or a couple things to do? What are some of your favorite things to do as an Edmonds local? Why would somebody want to come to Edmonds or even move there? What are some of those fun activities?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we like to go out on our boat, our boat club boat. We like to go down to the beach. We've got a small dog now. She doesn't maybe like the bigger dogs very much, but there's a great dog beach.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Hiking around Edmonds, just spending time in the downtown. There's hiking trails. You go to kind of more North Edmonds, but yeah, the whole downtown core of Edmonds it's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned, they have a dog park down on the waterfront at the very end past the marina, and it's really cool because it kind of butts into the rocks. So your dogs there's really no other place for them to go. But they have what do they call it, leash-free dog park, too. So off leash, yeah. Right. So it's really cool feature down there. Super dog friendly. Most of the restaurants and shops downtown too are pretty animal friendly. I was going to ask you, because I know a lot's changed in Edmonds. Let's say you and your wife are going out for a dinner and you want to stay local. Where do you guys like to go for dinner in Edmonds?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, if you had asked me that in the middle of the downturn in 2011, it was just half vacant, and you're so
Anthony's.
Yeah.
That was like the only place.
Arnie's and Anthony's, which by the way, Arnie's fantastic. Love Arnie's.
Yep.
Was just there for lunch today.
The Beach Cafe is a favorite of ours,
and the Beach Cafe was, I think, still there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But there's so many options now. I mean, you got Ipulo, which is fantastic, and Salt and Iron, and the Loft, and if you're talking about kind of higher end type of stuff, and my friend Brian just opened Off Main.
There you go,
which is fantastic as well. I mean, there's got to be a dozen good dining options for a date night with your wife.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, Jenny and I like Five Bistro up on the top of the hill.
Five, oh, that's right. I forget about it. Yeah, Five's fantastic.
Yeah, talk about close to home. You can have dinner and a glass of wine and not have to drive for, 45 minutes downtown. So downtown absolutely. Seattle. So yeah, it's great. Now, what about kids? I know you have kids. So you taking the kids out with you? Where are you going?
Gosh. So our daughter's 7. She loves the Tacky Tiki.
Okay.
Yeah, we love going to the down.
You like the Tacky Tiki too. It's not just her.
That's right. You've got the Wagyu burger. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, twist my arm. But you go to the Tiki. That beach cafe is good. They got that little sand.
My kids love the sand in the beach cafe.
Yeah, it's just that little sandbox, but the kids love it.
It's not as much fun this time of year.
No, not right now. Right?
It's way better in the summertime.
Although Layla would still get in there. She doesn't care.
Yeah, mine as well.
So the Sandbox Cafe is like on the first floor of Anthony's, right down there on the water. So you could be out on the patio there having dinner and drinks, and your kids could be literally in a enclosed area, just hanging out. And
it's great.
What's behind you is the marina. So you're hearing seagulls, you're seeing the water and seeing boats. It's really cool.
Absolutely.
Our kids love it down there too. So
you can't forget about Onopoke as well, up the hill.
Yeah.
I know you're not a sushi fan, Dan, but it is amazing food.
No, it's fantastic.
Have you been, Bill?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great poke.
Yeah.
Yep.
My former neighbor at this point is the owner, so I have to give a little plug.
there you go.
Yeah. Well, let's transition and talk a little bit about some of the estate planning essentials or considerations when people are moving from out of state to Washington State. And Bill, you're an expert at a lot of different types of law, but estate planning is one of the things that your firm does, that you do, and you've helped me with personally. So I guess I'll start with the first question. What are some of the key planning considerations that individuals should keep in mind when they're moving to a new state, and specifically Washington State?
Yeah. Let's say in estate planning in general, I mean, it's crucial for a lot of reasons that are pretty obvious, but you're making a very difficult time for your family much easier when you have a squared away estate plan. They're already grieving. They're going through difficult things, and if there are financial struggles that make people upset with each other because things are not clear, then that's just a terrible strain on an already difficult situation. And so proper estate planning really lessens the burden on grieving family members. And so that's true, of course, of any state. That's not state specific, but I don't mean to be overly obvious, but if you've got some means, you got to have a squared away estate plan for your family's sake. So when you come to Washington, if you come to Washington, what differentiates Washington estate planning from other states? You're moving in from out of state, and the absolute number one thing is Washington's estate tax, which is a confusing term because it sounds like I'm saying state tax. It's estate tax. Some states call it an inheritance tax. I call it death tax to avoid any kind of confusion. So Washington's death tax is the highest in the nation.
Wow.
And it triggers at one of the lowest triggering points in the nation. There are quite a few states that don't have a death tax at all. Washington does, Oregon does, California does, and like I say, Washington's triggering point is just under 2.2 million. I believe is next year going to about 2.4 million. But it triggers at that point, and it's every dollar above that. And if you have any kind of means in the great state of Washington, especially the Seattle area, you're going to have.
You should move somewhere else before you die.
Yeah, honestly, I've had some clients do that.
It's terrible.
No
I know
They've
people that have moved that are getting
have.
older, and they intentionally moved out of the area.
Yep.
For the sake of their what they're going to pass along to their families.
I had clients
legacies.
exposed to millions of dollars of estate tax, and just
They
left.
just moved.
That was the easiest silver bullet. So yeah.
I guess that's not a benefit of moving to Washington than having the estate tax.
No, it's not. But proper planning, there's a lot of mitigation that you can do there. And
yeah, well, I mean, while
that's
we're
part
on
of what
that
we do.
topic, talking about the taxes, that's one of the main tax implications moving here. What are some ways that people can mitigate those taxes that are coming their way?
On the death tax side?
Yeah, let's talk about death tax.
Yeah. I mean, really, one of the benefits of Washington is you don't have state income tax, but you do have, what did they call it?
Is it a capital gains tax?
The capital gain tax, yes,
not
which is
income, but it's
definitely not an income tax. If it
I'm no
walks like a
accountant.
duck and quacks like, well, anyways, yes, but leaving the capital gain tax aside, there's Washington death tax again, triggering on the death of the second spouse at just under 2.2 million and going to just about 2.4.
And that's not very much money these days.
It's not around here. Nope. So what do you do to mitigate that? The easiest thing you can do is have a death tax avoidance trust that's built into your will. If you're married, it's only available if you're married. But for married folks, it's disclaimer trust is the way we draft them typically at our firm. Sometimes you'll hear it called a credit shelter trust or a bypass trust. Those are slightly different. They're not optional, whereas the disclaimer trust is. It's a little more flexible tool, I think.
I believe that's what you gave me.
Correct. Yep. So you guys have, disclaimer trust built into your will. So they're trusts that don't do anything while you're living. They spring into being upon the death of the first spouse at the option of the surviving spouse.
But you get to choose whether it's activated or not.
Correct.
Okay.
And long story short, in some situations you don't want to bother with it, and others you do. So that's a key item around here. It's just a no-brainer to insert that kind of a trust into every married couple's estate plan. It essentially doubles your protection against death tax. The really short version is it'll double your protection from about 2.2 to about 4.4, and then when the jump up happens from 2.4 to 4.8 of coverage, and then there's other techniques you can use to mitigate death tax when you get above. If you have the happy problem of being over 5 million or so as a married couple, then you've got other options there as well. But the easiest, most straightforward one is the disclaimer trust, or to have a revocable living trust that essentially does the same thing.
Okay. What would be the difference between the revocable living trust and the disclaimer trust? What, like, the differentiating factors there?
Yeah, so the disclaimer trust is built into the will, and you own all of your assets in your own name during your lifetime. So you and your wife, you've got all of your assets. You're not transferring them during your lifetime into a trust. So there's a simplicity factor there that's kind of nice. You're not running your life through a little company, which is what a revocable living trust is. You're transferring all of your assets during your lifetime into a little company that gives you there's a bit of a hassle of doing that, but also there's not liability protection in the vast majority of instances. So a lot of people have this idea that if they move their assets into a revocable living trust, they're going to shield them from liability. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear when people call me. Not the case. So there's a hassle factor in the revocable living trust.
Yep.
A lot of people think they're going to avoid probate with a revocable living trust, which if it's done the right way, yes, it avoids probate, but probate is not nearly as big of a deal and as expensive and time consuming as it used to be. Long story short there again. So avoiding probate was my grandparents' generation. That was their mission in life, and you hear people trying to really want to avoid probate. Not that big of a deal anymore. I think there's a lot of advantages in just having wills, having disclaimer trusts, and not trying to run the rest of your life through a little company, which is what the revocable living trust is. But if you're willing to do it, there are some advantages to the revocable living trust.
Okay. So what are some other tax implications that people might want to deal with as they're moving into Washington State outside of the death tax?
Gosh, I think I'd have to talk to a CPA on the details.
I know
of that
you're
one,
not a CPA.
I know it. I don't even like to play one on TV. So I think the advantage, other than the death tax, you've got the advantage of just the lack of, like we just mentioned, the lack of an income tax, a state income tax, which is definitely an advantage in Washington. If you've got significant net worth and you're selling, I think it's 250 or 250,000 of liquid assets like stocks, bonds, and you're doing more than that in a year, you trigger the new the new capital gain tax in Washington, the state capital gain tax. So you got to watch out for that. Again, happy problem to have, but it's definitely a consideration.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what I can think of off the top of my head.
No, that's good. So for people with kids like me and like you and like Dan, Dan's kids are almost outside of maybe where you'd be considering some of the things, but I'm thinking about guardianship. What are the things that people should be thinking about when they move here? Do they need to make any changes?
Oh, sure. Yeah. If you got minor children, you want to make sure your guardianship provision is squared away in the will. In other words, leaving your kids to the people that you would want to raise them in a worst case scenario where you and your spouse are both gone. So, yeah, huge, most important consideration of any will. Now, I mean, in theory, any state's guardianship provision should be honored by Washington.
Okay.
But for sure, you would want to get, if you move to Washington, you want to get a Washington estate planning lawyer to get eyes on the guardianship provision of your will from another state, just to make sure that it's properly drafted. Again, I don't think there's anything magic state to state with a guardianship provision, but it's crucial that it's be drafted the right way.
Okay, no, that's fair. Well, as a real estate agent and a mortgage lender and a real estate attorney, I'm curious what type of things people should be thinking about from the real estate perspective. So moving here from out of state, what are the things they should be considering there? Let's say they own some property and they maybe are going to buy some property, right? Those are both different scenarios.
Sure. Washington specific, I'm not sure this would be specific to Washington, but if you've got investment property, certainly you want to own it in an LLC. If you've got your own personal residence, you do not want to own it in an LLC. If your estate plan is done through a revocable living trust, you'll want to transfer the property, even your own personal residence, into the revocable living trust.
Okay.
But never your personal residence into an LLC.
Why is that? Why do you not want to have your personal residence in an LLC? Because I see that. Some people do it. They think they're protecting themselves.
Sure. Yeah, it wouldn't, very likely not to be honored by a court anyway as an asset protection vehicle, because your personal residence isn't your business.
That makes sense.
Although I guess you might be a rare exception. You're running a business.
The swim school.
Right. But your primary purpose for your personal residence
is to live there.
Right. It's not a business purpose. So that would probably be disregarded. But more importantly, you actually lose some asset protection because you lose the homestead exemption, which is protection from judgment creditors that's already built in statutorily. and you don't, if you have your primary residence in an LLC, you lose that homestead exemption. There's also some tax disadvantages that I'd have to go back and pick my CPA's brain about.
That's fair. So what you do is you create this entity that doesn't protect you at all, and then
it actually harms you,
and then you lose all the
Right.
benefits of a primary residence.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I want to jump in here because I get this a lot when I'm going through the pre-approval process with clients, and we're seeing this more often now where, because prices are so expensive, we're seeing first-time homebuyers buying with a partner, a friend, maybe a significant other where they really haven't tied the knot yet. And so they're like, should we put this home in an LLC, in case something happens to us or whatever? And I'm like, or they got some advice for that. And I was like, no, I think what you're talking about is a partnership agreement. So can you elaborate on that, where we've got, let's say, I'm just making this scenario up, but you got a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and, they met in college, and both of them got jobs at Amazon now, and they're making good money, and they've got, one's putting down 100,000, the other's putting down 60. And
this sounds like a real scenario, by the way.
Literally, we deal with
real.
this often, very, very real. And so, but you got one that's putting, contributing about 100 grand to the down payment, one that's contributing 60, and then, but we're using both of them to qualify. What are your suggestions? I know the answer to this, but I think I want you to explain this, because I think you're going to find value in this. In that particular situation, you always got to look at, and I learned this from you relative to an estate planning, it's better to talk about these things while you're alive. In this particular case, it's better to talk about these things while you're getting along versus doing it when you're not. And so what do you suggest in that particular situation?
Yeah, correct. Well, so Dan, you're talking about, there's two different scenarios. You've got the boyfriend, girlfriend buying together. Then you've got, like, you and I identify an investment property and we want to buy it together. So if you and I go buy an investment property together, we form an LLC and we buy that property together, or all three of us buy it together, which would be fun, by the way.
Power LLC.
It'd be fun.
Yeah.
And we do that, and we have what a lot of people call an operating agreement. The statute calls an LLC agreement. That's just our partnership agreement. That's our deal between each other.
I want out in 3 years. Jenny and I are moving. We don't want anything to do with it.
Right.
How do you guys buy me out, et cetera? Right?
Correct. How do we buy you out?
Okay.
How do we resolve disputes between each other? Who has the authority to buy and sell their interest or doesn't have authority to buy and sell their interest? Who has authority to make management decisions about the LLC? So we deal with that in the LLC agreement.
Okay.
Contrast that with the boyfriend, girlfriend who are buying not an investment property, but their primary residence.
Yep.
I think was your example.
Absolutely.
So if they're doing that, they can't put their primary residence in an LLC for the reason we just talked about. So what a lot of people would think is that that they would have something called a tenancy in common agreement. And if you had, if you and I just decided to buy a big house and separate it upstairs and downstairs, and our families were, you were going to live upstairs and I was going to live downstairs, you with your family, me with my family, which by the way, people are doing.
And they're expensive to live here.
Absolutely. So that, I know that's not the example you're talking about, but in that example, so there's really three. There's the three of us buying property together. Then there's the two of us splitting a big house and our families are separated. And in that scenario, we'd have a tenancy in common agreement.
Which that's becoming more and more common with the DADU laws and everything, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Correct.
Or even like mom and dad going in with the kids. Kind of have everybody buying together.
Correct. If we're all living, if we're families living in the same single family residence on a single tax parcel, then you've got a tenancy in common agreement or a TIC. And that has the same function, long story short, it has the same function as the LLC agreement. It does a lot of the same things as the LLC agreement, but outside the LLC context. So we still maintain all the benefit of owning our single family residence in our own name. Versus, I'm finally getting the scenario you gave me.
This is great.
Which is the third scenario where you've got boyfriend and girlfriend buying together, and that create. So a lot of people, and I get a lot of calls, and they think they need a tenancy in common agreement. They think they need a TIC, but there's actually a layer of complexity on top of that, which is that they need to be avoiding the creation of what's called a committed intimate relationship, a CIR. It used to be called a meretricious relationship, but a lot of people in Washington know that Washington doesn't have common law marriage. What I always say is it has something that's way worse, which is this CIR, committed intimate relationship. My partner, Demetra Scott, and the lawyers that work with her deal with these CIR situations all the time. And what it does is after a certain amount of time of the boyfriend, girlfriend living together, sharing household expenses, possibly holding themselves out as married or possibly not, possibly having children together, possibly not, after a certain amount of time of being together and living together, a court at some unknown time would say, hey, you're in the committed intimate relationship. And it changes in scenario by scenario. You never know when that's going to be. If we're throwing a dart at somewhere in 3 to 4 years is about what it takes, but that's just based on past cases. It could be any pretty broad range of time. So you really, long story short, you really want to avoid being in a committed intimate relationship without some kind of contract. If you're not going to be married, then you got to have a contract, which is commonly referred to as a status of property agreement. So that's the contract. To finally answer your question, Dan, that's the contract that the boyfriend, girlfriend want to have, not just a tenancy in common agreement. And the committed or the status of property agreement is very similar to a prenuptial agreement. It functions very much the same way. It says, here's what's my property and here's what's your property. And these two buckets are going to stay independent of each other as we go forward. And if the relationship ends, or you got to have wills for if you die. But if the relationship says, okay, if the relationship ends, here's what happens to each bucket of property. Very much like a prenup. So that's the sort of the little bit of layer of hassle there with that is, and it's not that big of a deal, but each partner, each member of the couple needs to have their own lawyer, and you can't have
interesting.
Right. You can't both go to one lawyer. In fact, it's a status of property agreement's not even enforceable at all if you both go to one lawyer. So it's just a matter of getting that squared away up front, and then boom, you're good. You go forward.
So my scenario with the boyfriend and girlfriend, and they've met each other 2 years ago in college and got their job at Amazon. They're buying a home. I've been saying, hey, I got a guy I want to recommend. It's simple. You can totally do this. And it's as simple as most likely like a partnership agreement. You need to get some type of an agreement in place up front. I'm going to change my talk track now to you need a status of property agreement.
Correct.
And then one of them can use you. Now, here's the follow-up question. I know you work, a partner at a big firm. Can one of your other partners or one of your other attorneys represent the other?
No.
Okay.
Nope. They're conflicted out.
It needs to be somebody outside of the firm.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Right. And so I would draft a tenancy and common agreement or LLC agreement. The status of property agreement is very specific. And it ought to be done by a family law attorney, and in other words, a divorce lawyer.
Okay.
That's really sort of their purview. And again, my partner, her name's Demetra Scott. She's a really good at this sort of thing, as are the lawyers that work with her.
Okay.
And but a good divorce lawyer is who should be drafting that, and then another divorce lawyer which is ironic because it's when everyone's getting along. As you said, it's when everyone's getting along, but it's still better
to handle it now.
Right. That's what they do. That's squarely in their wheelhouse. And so those are the people to be drafting that status of property agreement.
I just became more intelligent.
Me too.
So how I get to talk with clients up front. So, and I can almost make a funny about it too, because I'm going to say I'm going to recommend you to my my recommended attorney's firm. But just a heads up, you will be meeting with a divorce attorney. And you're not even married yet.
It's real.
That's awesome.
Real.
Okay,
yes, indeed.
Cool. This is great, man.
This is awesome.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Bill. I have one more question for you.
Sure.
And that is, what are some practical steps that people can take to make sure that they have a smooth transition to Washington, specifically around their estate plan?
Yeah, I mean, just call an estate planning lawyer and have them review the existing plan. It may very well be that the existing wills that the spouses bring to Washington contain a trust that is appropriate for death tax avoidance in Washington. If that's the case, that's great. Mm-hmm. But it may not be the case, and getting eyes on that is, I think, the most important thing. And every estate planning lawyer says have your estate plan reviewed every 5 years or so, regardless, and that's probably good advice. I always try to draft my estate plans to be as likely to carry out the couple's wishes as possible, no matter how far down the road we go.
Makes sense.
But you never know, and so the every 5 years rule is probably a good idea. So or if you change your mind about something, or if you have another child, or if you congratulations.
I know, I keep having more. Getting free work out of Bill.
No, your wife does.
That's true.
That is hilarious. Yeah.
No
I'm participating.
Yeah, all right, fair enough. And
a little bit.
Right. So that's it. I would just get eyes on the estate plan from a Washington estate planner.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, Bill's certainly a great one. So if you are listening to this, Bill will take great care of you, and Beresford and Booth will take great care of you. Mm-hmm. Dan, did you have any parting questions before we wrap this all up?
I was just going to highly recommend them. They're professional. They're in the heart of Edmonds. This guy knows Edmonds is about as good as anyone that I know, probably better than most real estate agents that sell real estate in Edmonds. So having lived there and worked there for as long as he has. So no, I think this has been super valuable. I think that I always encourage you, with my first time home buyers and people that I'm relocating here, especially if they're buying with a partner, it doesn't hurt, especially if you have to pay a little bit of money to get some legal counsel. Trust me, it'll be worth it. Like I just said a minute ago, it's a lot easier to talk about these things when it's cordial and you're getting along than when you got a lawyer up and the next thing you know, it turns into a bloodbath. So, hey, I think this was great, and I'm looking forward to learning more about this and digging into this.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Bill, for joining us here today. And if you're new to the podcast, please give us a thumbs up here. And if you know somebody who could benefit from listening to this podcast, please share it with them. And I guess we'll end with that.
We'll end with goodbye Seattle.